When measuring an angle, and we'll call that angle theta, there are two main units that are used. In this video, we're going to be measuring the angles in degrees, but an angle can also be measured with the units that we call radians. In order to indicate that an angle is measured in degrees, we have to have a degree symbol on it. If no units are indicated, that implies that the angle is being measured in radians. So when we're measuring an angle in degrees, we must put the degree symbol. In one complete revolution of a circle, there are 360 degrees. And so to illustrate a 360-degree angle in standard position, we'll start with the initial side along the positive x-axis, and the terminal side is going to sweep all the way around the circle so that it lands on top of the initial side. So the measure of this angle going around one complete revolution would be 360 degrees. If we look at half of a revolution, again, to be in standard position, the initial side has to be along the positive x-axis, and if the terminal side sweeps halfway around the circle so that it lands on the negative x-axis, this angle has a measure of 180 degrees, half of a revolution. If we go a quarter of the way around the circle, again, we'll draw this in standard position, initial side along the positive x-axis. When our terminal side rotates 1/4 of the way around the circle, we end up with a right angle that is measuring 90 degrees. So a 180-degree angle is a straight line, and a 90-degree angle is a right angle. So let's look at an example. In order to determine how much of a revolution is completed when we travel through a certain angle, we're basically going to be converting our angle from degrees to revolutions. So in order to do that, we'll take our measure of our angle, 135 degrees, and drop a 1 underneath it. Now we're going to use a very common trick that will be used a lot in trigonometry and other math classes, which is that we're going to multiply this quantity by what I'll call a well-chosen 1. Let's recall that if we multiply anything by 1, it doesn't change the value. And notice from before, when we have an angle that sweeps out one complete revolution, the measure of that angle is 360 degrees. So since these two angles are the same measure, when we multiply by this ratio, essentially we're multiplying by 1. But we also could multiply in the other direction, 360 degrees over 1 revolution. Again, both of these ratios are equivalent to 1. And we just need to select whichever one is appropriate that will enable us to convert out of our measure of degrees and into the measure of revolutions, which is what we've been asked to convert to. So we're going to multiply by one of these well-chosen ones. Now to get degrees to cancel out and to land with revolutions as the unit that remains, we'll need to multiply by this version of our well-chosen 1. So we'll multiply by 1 revolution over 360 degrees, and again, this ratio has a value that's equal to 1. So we're not changing the value of the angle that we originally started with. But choosing this multiplier enables us to cancel the units that are degrees and end up with the remaining unit of revolutions. So we get 135 times 1, and then revolutions remains in the numerator, so that's just going to be 135. And let's go ahead and keep our units of revolutions. And then we're dividing by 360. This fraction, 135 over 360, reduces down to being 3/8, and then our remaining units is revolution. So our answer is going to be 3/8 of 1 revolution. And so now we're asked to sketch this angle in standard position. So we start with our initial side along the positive x-axis. Let's recall that 1/2 of a revolution, which by the way is the same thing as 4/8 of a revolution, is 180 degrees or a straight line. And also 1/4 of a revolution is the same thing as 2/8 of a revolution, which was 90 degrees, a right angle. So if our terminal side is here for 2/8 of a revolution, and out here at the straight line for 4/8 of the revolution, and I'm going to redraw the answer angle to be in black now, 3/8 of a revolution is going to be halfway in between these. So essentially splitting this second quadrant in half. So this is our angle that was 135 degrees, but also 3/8 of 1 revolution. Let's look at one more example. How much of a revolution is completed if we travel negative 120 degrees? And then again, we're going to want to sketch that angle. So we begin with the angle that we're trying to convert from degrees into revolutions, and we're going to multiply it by a well-chosen 1. And now, depending on whether we want to convert from degrees to revolutions or from revolutions to degrees, we'll choose one of these two options, that 360 degrees is the same as 1 revolution and 1 revolution is the same as 360 degrees. Both of these ratios are equivalent to 1, and we'll choose one of them to multiply by, the one that will cause the degree symbol to cancel. Since our degrees is in the top, we want to choose the one that has degrees in the bottom, and then the units of revolutions is going to remain in the top. So this is the version of the well-chosen one that we want to select that will leave the units of revolutions and cancel out the units of degrees. When we multiply, we'll see here that these degree symbols are going to cancel out, and we end up with negative 120 over 360, and the units that remain are revolutions. This fraction then reduces down to being negative 1/3, and again we have revolutions. So this would be how many revolutions we travel, negative 1/3, and then we're going to sketch that angle in standard position. So again, we'll have the initial side along the positive x-axis. And since our angle theta was negative, that means the terminal side is going to sweep in a clockwise direction. Remember, half of a revolution is 180 degrees, or that straight line. So 1/3 of a revolution is going to be a little bit less than that. So we swoop in this clockwise direction to let our terminal side land down here somewhere in the 3rd quadrant. So this is the angle that measures negative 120 degrees, but it also can be considered negative 1/3 of a revolution.